Guys, today I want to talk about something that's been on a lot of players' minds lately. The solo queue buff in Dead by Daylight. A lot of players have been asking for this change for a really long time now, and it's finally in the game. However, with any change, there's always pros and cons. With the new addition of the Survivor HUD, survivors can now see what all of their teammates are doing. They can see if someone's blessing a totem, they can see if someone's in a chase, they can see if you're being healed, your progress recovery on your down, and of course, if you're repairing a generator. And this is a huge buff for solo queue players, as it allows them to make better decisions and ultimately improve the chances of survival for themselves and the rest of their team. However, I think there's still some issues with solo queue that need to be addressed. One of the biggest problems, in my opinion, is the massive skill gap between a solo queue player and players who play Survive with Friends with voice comms. This can make the game feel very unfair for solo queue players, because a Survive with Friends can communicate pretty much anything that's happening in the game, whereas the solo queue player is pretty much always left in the dark. I think it's important to note that when Dead by Daylight was originally launched, players couldn't actually play with each other, so these issues never existed. But when the game grew, players demanded that they be able to play with their friends, and of course Survive with Friends was added into the game, meaning that these issues between solo queue and Survive with Friends were introduced as well. So after 7 years of Dead by Daylight being released, Behavior are finally seeking to bridge the gap between a solo queue player and a Survive with Friends player by giving all survivors lots of information. However, the community is scared, and there's been a lot of backlash already for this change. Coconut RTS released a video discussing how Japanese players in the Dead by Daylight community are already disliking this solo queue change, and how they think that this will make the killer experience worse, unfun, and how actually it's going to make Survivor too easy. For example, some players think that good survivors will benefit from this massively, but bad survivors are only going to become worse with more information. And other players think that this will cause killer players in general to stop playing Dead by Daylight. I think Coconut's video is quite interesting because it gives the opinions of a community that's probably less accessible to the Western world and how those players are responding to the changes. So if you're interested, go check that out. But something I really want to focus on is actually ScottJund and his opinion, as he weighed in on the solo queue changes. And actually, Scott pointed out something that I initially missed in the patch notes.
I did want to talk about one thing in particular that I caught on the patch notes, or rather that somebody pointed out to me from the patch notes, and it's this line right here. Generator progress is not shown on Survivor HUD activity icons, and this is a known issue. So what that implies is that you are actually supposed to be able to see the progress of the generator that their teammates are working on.
And Scott argues that with these changes, it will make it too easy for solo queue players to mimic the efficiency of competitive Survive with Friend players, and that this ultimately is a negative thing for Dead by Daylight.
I think that's actually too much information. I think what we have right now in game is perfect. But if we start showing the generator progress and the generator, like that they're going to be working on, and the generator progress that it has, I think that's starting to put too much information in the survivor's hands for free. Pretty much what this is like comp generator callouts, where every 10 seconds someone's going, okay, my gen's at 20%, my gen's at 30%, my gen's at 50%. That's like we're matching the information that comp players have now. And we don't want to push the game to that side either. That's too much information.
Personally, I disagree with ScottJund on this, and I think it's a good thing. The skill gap between solo queue players and Survivor Friend players is being reduced, making the game fairer for everyone. And I don't think it's a fair statement to say that this will make solo queue players like competitive Swift players, when already your casual Swift playing on voice comms is already announcing the same things, such as, hey, my gen's almost done, you're going to get adrenaline soon, play safe. Or I'll go for the rescue because my gen's almost done, you stick on your gen. Or the gen's almost done, don't start a generator, hop on the exit gate and we can get out of here. This is kind of things that casual players are already communicating to their teammates when the game is reaching these critical moments. And it's not something that is just isolated to competitive Swift gameplay. And at the end of the day, Behavior cannot remove the ability for Survivor Friends to communicate with each other this information. So the only option they have is to bring solo queue players up to a similar level so that they can reduce the gap between solo queue players and Swift players and balance Survivor and Killer on a whole more fairly. That being said, I actually think there are some changes that behavior could make to further improve the solo queue experience. For example, you can give the solo queue players even more information, such as using a ping system so that they can communicate to each other the location of the killer, generators, hex totems, etc. And a pre-made chat menu that allows you to give messages like, the killer is chasing me, I need help, someone go for the rescue, I need a heal, and my generator has X amount of progress. Because these are all things that any Survive with Friends can already communicate and will communicate and do communicate. Regardless of if you're a Friday night casual Swift group just having a couple of games with friends or a competitive Swift, this is information that you're already able to give to each other that solo queue players are missing out on. And if behavior want to truly balance the game properly, then what they have to do is reduce the discrepancy of skill between a solo queue player and a Swift player as much as possible so that they can then balance the survivor role accordingly. Once that discrepancy has been reduced, behavior can adjust killers, perks, add-ons, gen times, hook states, every aspect of Dead by Daylight, and not have to worry about how it's going to influence a Swift and a solo queue player individually because the skill gap's reduced. They can just focus on how it influences Survivor as a whole, and whether or not Survivor is too strong, too weak, needs buffs, needs nerfs, or whether a weak killer needs buffing and a strong killer needs nerfing because of the differences in play between solo queue and Swift. By doing this, you create a better game, a healthier game, a fairer game that can be enjoyed by anyone, regardless of if you're playing solo queue or playing Swift. I think it's quite an unpopular opinion to suggest that the Survivor role as a whole should receive more information and more buffs to better balance the game. But I truly believe that if the Survivor role was balanced better between solo queue players and Swift players, by giving players not on voice comms all the same information that players on voice comms can generate, then by doing that, you merge the two into just a Survivor role as a whole, allowing you to better balance the game overall. And once you have that more equalized gameplay aspect between a solo queue player and a Swift player, behavior can start to introduce new gameplay mechanics that allow killers to more appropriately deal with coordinated survivors. If behavior wanted to, they could learn from some of the more successful gameplay elements from a game like Video Horror Society, VHS for example, which had two features that allowed the killer player to deal with coordinated survivors. One was a rage meter. After injuring 3 survivors, your 4th hit would insta down anyone that came about. And that would allow you to focus a little bit more on hit and run strategies or just spreading pressure across a team and then getting reward for it by being able to insta down and hook someone. Or they could steal the prize mechanic from VHS, which allowed a player to generate power over so many hits and then disrupt the survivor team in a way, whether it be slower gen progress or blocking gens for a small period of time, anything like that. It could just literally be revealing the survivor's locations after 8 successful hits. Anything like that would give the killer more information, more tools to deal with a survivor team that's more coordinated. And these are gameplay mechanics that could be introduced into Dead by Daylight now that the skill discrepancy between a solo queue player and a Survive with Friends player has been eliminated. What do you guys think of my opinions on this? Should solo queue be buffed even further, or do you think Scott's opinion that it's gone too far is correct? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see what someone can already do with the solo queue buffs, then check out this video here where I micro-analyze everything in the game to try and secure escape versus a nurse.